David Rodriguez stared at the spreadsheet on his computer screen for the third time that morning. Something wasn't adding up. His fast food chain, Tasty Bites, had grown from a single food cart to 200 locations across the country. 20 years of hard work had turned his simple dream into a reality worth $500 million. But lately the numbers told a troubling story. Customer satisfaction scores were dropping. Not everywhere, but in specific locations scattered across different cities. Online reviews mentioned things like cold food, dirty tables, and rude service. Yet every time David asked his regional managers about these complaints, they had the same answer. Everything was fine, just some unhappy customers who couldn't be pleased. Nothing to worry about. David wasn't convinced. He had started this business because he loved food and loved people. Back when he ran that single food cart, he knew every customer by name. He remembered their favorite orders and asked about their families. That connection, that care, was what made Tasty Bites special. But now, sitting in his corner office on the 15th floor, he felt a million miles away from those early days. His phone buzzed with another meeting reminder. Another PowerPoint presentation. Another conference call with investors. David closed his laptop and leaned back in his leather chair. When was the last time he had actually eaten at one of his own restaurants? Not at a grand opening with photographers and local news crews. Not at a corporate event with managers standing at attention. Just walked in like a normal person and ordered a meal. He couldn't remember. That afternoon, David made a decision. He canceled his meetings for the next day and told his assistant he was taking a personal day. Then he went shopping at a discount store, something he hadn't done in years. He picked up faded jeans, a plain gray hoodie, and a baseball cap from a local college team. At home, he looked at himself in the mirror. The expensive haircut and clean shave screamed wealthy businessman. That wouldn't work. For the next week, David let his beard grow out. He practiced slouching a little, walking with less confidence. He bought cheap reading glasses from a pharmacy and wore old sneakers he found in the back of his closet. When he looked at himself again, he saw a different person. Just a regular guy, maybe a construction worker or a truck driver, someone who would blend into any crowd. David picked his target location carefully, store number 214, in a working-class neighborhood about 40 minutes from his home. The online reviews for this place were brutal. 1-star ratings talking about hair in the food, employees who looked miserable, bathrooms that made people want to leave immediately. But the regional manager for that area, a man named Greg Patterson, had sent a glowing report just last month. According to Greg, store 214 was performing beautifully. Clean, efficient, profitable. Someone was lying. On a Tuesday morning, David drove his old pickup truck instead of his luxury car. He had bought the truck years ago for a commercial shoot and kept it for sentimental reasons. Now it served a different purpose. He parked in the lot of Tasty Bites number 214 and sat for a moment, watching people come and go. Most looked like they were grabbing breakfast before work. Nobody looked particularly happy. Taking a deep breath, David stepped out of the truck and walked toward the entrance. The first thing he noticed was the smell, not the warm, inviting aroma of fresh coffee and grilled breakfast sandwiches. Instead, a mix of stale grease and harsh cleaning chemicals hit his nose. It reminded him of a highway rest stop bathroom, not a restaurant. The glass door had fingerprints all over it. The welcome mat was torn at one corner. Inside, the situation didn't improve. The floor felt sticky under his shoes, like someone had mopped with dirty water and just spread the grime around. 3 tables were empty but covered with food wrappers and spilled drinks. Nobody had cleaned them, even though it was barely 10:30 in the morning. David counted 6 customers in line ahead of him. That gave him time to observe. The menu board above the counter flickered, one section completely dark. The promotional posters were outdated, advertising a summer special even though fall had already begun. Through the opening to the kitchen, he could see stacks of boxes, some torn open and sitting on the floor instead of on shelves. This was not the Tasty Bites he had built. This was not the dream he had worked 20 years to create. The line moved slowly, very slowly. David watched as one young employee tried to handle the register, pack orders, and fill drinks all at the same time. The kid looked about 17 with sweat on his forehead and panic in his eyes. Where were the other employees? David knew the morning shift should have at least 4 people working the front. Finally, David reached the counter. The young cashier looked exhausted. with dark circles under her eyes that made her seem much older than she probably was. Her name tag said Riley, and it was pinned crooked on her uniform shirt. When she looked at him, she tried to smile, but it was the kind of smile that took effort. The kind that people give when they're just trying to survive the day. "Welcome to Tasty Bites," Riley said, her voice flat and automatic. "What can I get for you today?" David ordered the Sunrise Deluxe breakfast sandwich and a large coffee. This was the signature breakfast item he had created himself, back in the food cart days. Fresh eggs, perfectly seasoned sausage, melted cheese, all on a toasted bagel. He had tested dozens of versions until he got it exactly right. The coffee was supposed to be a special dark roast blend, rich and smooth. Riley punched in the order without making eye contact. "That'll be $13.75. David handed her a $20 bill. As Riley opened the cash register to make change, he noticed her hands were shaking slightly. Not a lot, but enough to be visible. She was nervous about something or scared or both. "How long have you worked here?" David asked, trying to sound casual and friendly. Riley's expression changed. Just for a second, her professional mask slipped. Her eyes got wet like she might cry, but she blinked quickly and looked down at the register. She glanced over her shoulder toward a door marked Manager's Office, then back at David. "About 6 months," she said quietly. "Do you like it?" David asked. Riley bit her lip. She looked at him more carefully now, maybe wondering why this random customer was asking personal questions. Then she leaned forward just slightly, her voice dropping to barely more than a whisper. "Sir, please don't order the coffee." David felt his heart sink into his stomach. Those 6 words told him everything he needed to know. Something was very, very wrong at store number 214. And whatever it was, this young employee was brave enough to warn a stranger, even though she was clearly afraid of getting in trouble. "What do you mean?" David asked, keeping his voice low to match hers. Before Riley could answer, a loud voice shouted from the kitchen area. "Riley, stop chatting and move faster. We've got orders backing up and you're standing around talking." Riley's face went pale. She quickly processed a refund for the coffee and handed David his change. As she gave him his receipt, David noticed she had written something on the back in tiny letters, so small he had to squint to read it later. A manager stormed out from the kitchen, his face red with anger and irritation. David's heart sank even further when he recognized the man. It was Greg Patterson himself, the regional manager who had sent that glowing report about this location. David stepped aside to wait for his food, but his mind was racing. In less than 5 minutes, he had seen enough to know that everything Greg had told him was a complete lie. And that was just the beginning. David moved to the waiting area, his hands gripping the receipt Riley had given him. He pulled it out and looked at the tiny writing on the back. The message made his stomach turn. "Machine hasn't been cleaned in weeks. Manager says it takes too much time." He looked up at the coffee machine behind the counter. From where he stood, he could see a dark residue around the edges, the kind of buildup that comes from days, maybe weeks, of neglect. This was a health hazard. This could make people sick. And Greg Patterson, the man who was supposed to be ensuring quality standards, apparently knew about it and didn't care. David watched Greg storm back toward the office, barking orders at Riley as he went. "And clean those tables. I don't care if you're the only one up here. Figure it out." Then Greg disappeared into the office, and through the window, David could see him sit down at a desk and pull out his phone. Riley grabbed a spray bottle and a rag, rushing to clean the dirty tables while also trying to keep an eye on the register in case another customer came in. David counted the employees he could see. Riley at the front, one kid working the grill, another person running between the drive-through window and the fry station, 3 people doing the work of 6, maybe 7. The order number system beeped and Riley called out number 42. David looked at his receipt. He was 42. Riley brought his food to the counter, and when she handed it to him, he could see her hands were still shaking. Her eyes met his for just a second, and he saw something there. Fear, yes, but also a kind of desperate hope. Like maybe this one customer who had been kind to her might understand what was really happening here. "Thank you," David said gently. Riley nodded quickly and went back to wiping down tables. David carried his food to a corner booth, the one spot in the restaurant where he could see everything but wouldn't be too obvious. He opened the wrapper on his Sunrise Deluxe sandwich and felt his heart break a little more. This wasn't his sandwich. This wasn't even close. The bagel was stale, probably a day old at least. The edges were hard. The egg was overcooked and rubbery. The sausage looked dried out like it had been sitting under a heat lamp for hours. The cheese wasn't melted, just sort of laying there in a sad, cold slice. David had spent months perfecting this recipe. He had taste-tested hundreds of versions. This sandwich was supposed to make people's mornings better. This sandwich was garbage. He forced himself to take a bite. It tasted as bad as it looked. The bagel crumbled in his mouth, dry and flavorless. The egg had no seasoning. The sausage was tough and cold in the middle. This wasn't just a bad sandwich. This was an insult to every customer who paid their hard-earned money expecting the quality that Tasty Bites promised. David set the sandwich down and looked around the restaurant. A middle-aged man in construction clothes was eating a breakfast burrito, scrolling through his phone with a bored expression. A woman in scrubs, probably a nurse heading home from a night shift, picked at her food without enthusiasm. Nobody looked happy. Nobody looked satisfied. These weren't customers enjoying a meal. These were people getting through a transaction because they were hungry and didn't have better options. This wasn't what David had built his company to be. For the next hour, David sat in that corner booth, barely touching his terrible sandwich, just watching. He saw Riley get yelled at 2 more times by Greg. Once because she took an extra minute to help an elderly customer who was confused about the menu. Once because she stopped to wipe up a spill near the soda fountain. Each time Greg would emerge from the office just long enough to criticize, then disappear again. The young guy working the grill looked like he was about to have a breakdown. Orders kept coming through the drive-thru, the front counter, and the mobile app all at once. He was flipping burgers, dropping fries, toasting buns, all while sweat dripped down his face. At one point, he dropped a spatula on the floor, picked it up, and started to use it again without washing it. Then he caught himself, looked around guiltily, and took the time to wash it properly, even though Greg shouted at him to move faster. These kids were trying. They were actually trying to do a good job despite having no support, no proper training, and a manager who only appeared to yell at them. Then something happened that made David's blood run cold. A young couple came in with a toddler, maybe 2 years old. The little girl was adorable, with pigtails and a bright pink jacket. They ordered kids' meals and specifically asked for milk for their daughter. Riley rang them up, prepared their order, and handed them their food with the first genuine smile David had seen from her. She even gave the little girl a sticker. The family sat down at a table near David. The father opened the milk carton to pour it into a sippy cup. Then he stopped. He looked at the carton more closely, turning it around to check the date stamp. His expression changed from confused to angry in about 2 seconds. "Are you kidding me?" the father said loudly. His wife leaned over to look. "That expired 6 days ago." 6 days! The father stood up and walked to the counter with the milk carton in his hand. His voice was controlled, but David could hear the anger underneath. "Excuse me, this milk is expired." "It expired almost a week ago." Riley's face went white. "I'm so sorry, sir. I didn't check the date. Let me get the manager." Greg came out of the office looking annoyed at being disturbed. He took the milk carton, barely glanced at it, and shrugged. "Yeah, it's a few days past. It's fine. Milk doesn't go bad that fast." The mother stood up now too, her voice rising. "Are you seriously trying to tell me it's okay to give expired milk to a 2-year-old child? Do you have any idea what that could do to her?" "Look, lady, it's just milk," Greg said dismissively. "If you're that worried about it, don't order milk. I can give you apple juice instead." "That's the best I can do." "The best you can do?" The father's voice got louder. "The best you can do is serve fresh, safe food. That's literally your only job." Greg crossed his arms. "I don't control what corporate sends us. We use what we have. Take the juice or don't. Either way, I need you to lower your voice. You're disturbing other customers." "We're disturbing customers?" The mother looked like she might explode. "You just tried to poison our daughter." "Nobody's poisoning anyone," Greg said, his tone condescending. "You're being dramatic. If you don't like it, there's a complaint number on your receipt. Now, do you want the juice or not?" The couple looked at each other in disbelief. The father grabbed their food, their daughter, and headed for the door. "We're never coming back here. And we're reporting this to the health department." "You do that," Greg called after them, not seeming worried at all. David watched this entire exchange with his hands clenched into fists under the table. His jaw was tight. His heart was pounding. This wasn't just bad management. This wasn't just cutting corners. This was dangerous. This was exactly the kind of thing that could shut down his entire company if word got out. and Greg Patterson had just acted like it was no big deal. But what made it worse was what Greg said about corporate not sending enough supplies. That was a complete lie. David knew the inventory system himself. He had designed it. Every location had the authority to order fresh supplies daily. They had relationships with local distributors specifically, so nothing ever sat too long. Greg was choosing not to order fresh supplies. He was using expired products to save money and make his location look more profitable on paper. David stood up. He couldn't sit there anymore. He couldn't watch this happen at a restaurant with his name on it. Every instinct told him to walk up to Greg right now, reveal who he was, and fire him on the spot. But something made him pause. If he did that now, Greg would just be one person gone. The problem was bigger than one bad manager. How many other locations were being run the same way? How many other Gregs were out there, lying in their reports and treating employees and customers like they didn't matter? David needed to see more. He needed to understand exactly what was happening before he took action. So he walked to the counter where Riley was standing, looking miserable and defeated after witnessing that confrontation with the angry parents. "Excuse me," David said quietly. "Can I ask you something?" Riley looked up at him nervously. "Yes, sir. Is it always like this?" Riley looked at David with wide eyes, then quickly glanced toward the manager's office. Greg was back inside, visible through the window, scrolling on his phone again. She bit her lip, clearly torn between wanting to talk and being afraid of getting in trouble. "I shouldn't say anything," Riley whispered. "I need this job." David's heart ached for her. She was just a kid, probably working to pay for college or help her family, and she was trapped in this situation, knowing things were wrong but too scared to speak up. He thought about his own daughter away at university. What if she was working somewhere like this? What if she was being treated this way? "I understand," David said gently. "I'm not trying to get you in trouble. I just noticed some things today that seem off." Riley looked at him for a long moment. Something in his tone, or maybe the kindness in his eyes, seemed to make her decide to trust him. She took a deep breath. "Can you wait until my break?" she asked quietly. "I've got 15 minutes in about 10 minutes. There's a bench out back by the dumpsters. Nobody goes there." David nodded. "I'll be there." Riley went back to work, and David walked outside to his truck. He sat there for a few minutes trying to calm down. He wanted to storm back in there and confront Greg immediately, but Riley was willing to tell him the truth, and he owed it to her to listen first. 10 minutes felt like an hour. Finally, David walked around to the back of the building. The area behind the restaurant was worse than the front. The dumpsters were overflowing with trash bags piled around them. The back door was propped open with a broken brick, and he could hear shouting from inside the kitchen. The pavement was stained with old grease and littered with cigarette butts. This was where the employees spent their breaks. This was their escape from the chaos inside. Riley came out the back door, pulling off her hat and running her hands through her hair. She looked exhausted. When she saw David waiting by the bench, she seemed surprised that he had actually shown up. "You really waited," she said. "I told you I would," David replied. They sat down on the bench, and for a moment Riley just stared at the ground. Then the words started pouring out of her like water from a broken dam. "It's been like this since Greg took over 8 months ago," she began. "Before that, we had a different manager. She was strict but fair, you know. She actually cared about the food we served and how we treated customers. But then corporate transferred her to another location, and Greg showed up." Riley explained how Greg immediately started cutting corners. He reduced the number of employees per shift to save on labor costs. He stopped ordering supplies as frequently, letting inventory run low or even expire before ordering more. When equipment broke down, he wouldn't report it because repairs would make his budget look bad. "That coffee machine you asked about," Riley continued. "It's supposed to be cleaned every single day, deep cleaned once a week. Greg says it takes too much time and we need to focus on speed instead. Same with the ice cream machine. It's been broken for 3 weeks. He hasn't even called for repairs." David listened, his jaw getting tighter with every word. This was worse than he thought. "What about the expired milk?" he asked. Riley's eyes filled with tears. That happens all the time. Greg orders the minimum amount of everything and tells us to use it even if it's past date. He says dates are just suggestions that food is still good for days after. But I know that's not true. My little brother got sick last month from expired yogurt, and I knew exactly how he felt because I've seen us serve that same kind of stuff here. She wiped her eyes quickly, embarrassed to be crying in front of a stranger. I tried to say something once. I told Greg that we shouldn't be serving expired food. He called me into his office and told me that if I couldn't follow simple instructions, there were plenty of other people who wanted my job. Then he cut my hours in half for 2 weeks as punishment. David felt rage building in his chest, but he kept his voice calm. Why haven't you reported this to someone higher up? There must be a corporate number or an email. Riley laughed, but it was a bitter sound with no humor in it. Greg told us that he reports directly to the owner. He says they're friends, that they talk all the time. He showed us a picture on his phone once of him and some guy at a golf course, said it was the CEO. Greg tells us that corporate loves him because his numbers are so good. He's got the most profitable location in the region, apparently. So who's going to believe us over him? David's heart sank. Greg was using David's own name as a weapon to keep these kids quiet, telling them that the CEO loved what he was doing, making them feel powerless. What about the other employees? David asked. How are they treated? Riley looked back at the building. Kevin, the guy on the grill, he's 17. This is his first job. Greg makes him work through his breaks because we're so understaffed. Kevin asked if he could sit down for 10 minutes last week because his feet were killing him, and Greg told him that lazy people don't succeed in life. He's just a kid. He shouldn't be talked to like that. She continued, her voice getting stronger as she talked. And Destiny, the girl doing drive-through and fries? She's a single mom. She's got a 3-year-old at home. Greg schedules her for closing shifts and then makes her come in early the next morning. When she asked if she could have a more consistent schedule so she could arrange childcare, he told her that her personal problems weren't his concern. The stories kept coming. Employees being written up for taking sick days, people being forced to work alone during busy periods, workers being blamed when equipment failed or supplies ran out, even though they had no control over ordering. Greg had created a culture of fear and silence. Everyone was too scared to speak up because they needed their jobs. The worst part, Riley said quietly, is that we all feel guilty. Like maybe we're the problem. Maybe we're not working hard enough. Maybe we're complaining too much. Greg is really good at making us feel like everything is our fault even when we know it's not. David sat there, absorbing everything Riley had told him. This wasn't just one bad location with one bad manager. This was systematic abuse. This was everything he had promised himself his company would never become. When he started Tasty Bites, he had 3 core values written on a napkin that he carried in his wallet for years. Respect for employees, quality for customers, integrity in everything. Greg Patterson represented the opposite of all 3. How many people have quit since Greg started? David asked. 12, Riley answered immediately. Out of a staff that's supposed to be 20, some people just stopped showing up. Others gave 2 weeks' notice, and Greg made those 2 weeks so miserable that they quit early. Now we're running on 8 people total, including Greg, and he doesn't actually work the floor. So really 7 of us are doing the work of 20. David stood up from the bench. He had heard enough. More than enough. He looked at Riley, this brave young woman who had risked her job to warn a stranger about coffee, and then trusted him enough to tell him the truth about everything. Riley, I need to ask you something important, David said. If you could change 3 things about this place, what would they be? Riley stood up too, looking surprised by the question. She thought for a moment. More staff, so we're not drowning every shift. Fresh supplies, so we're not scared to serve the food. And a manager who actually cares about us as people, not just as numbers on a spreadsheet. That's very reasonable, David said. Those things should be the bare minimum. Yeah, well, bare minimum would be amazing compared to what we have now, Riley said with a sad smile. She checked her phone. My break's almost over. I need to get back before Greg notices I've been gone too long. Riley, wait, David said. One more thing. Are you working tomorrow? She nodded. Same shift, 10 to 6. Good, David said. Things are going to change. I promise you that. Riley gave him a confused look. What do you mean? Are you like a health inspector or something? David smiled, but it wasn't a happy smile. It was the smile of someone who had just made a very important decision. Something like that. Thank you for trusting me today. You're going to be okay. Riley headed back inside, still looking confused. David walked to his truck and sat in the driver's seat. He pulled out his phone and made 3 calls. The first was to his head of human resources. The second was to his chief legal officer. The third was to his personal assistant. Tomorrow morning, things were going to be very different at Tasty Bites location number 214. David didn't sleep much that night. He kept thinking about Riley's face when she talked about feeling guilty, about wondering if maybe she was the problem. That's what bad leaders do. They make good people question themselves. They create environments where speaking up feels dangerous and staying silent feels like survival. He also thought about Greg Patterson's personnel file, which his assistant had emailed him at midnight. Greg had been with the company for 3 years. His performance reviews were glowing. His profit margins were the highest in the region. On paper, he looked like the perfect manager. But paper doesn't show you expired milk being served to toddlers. Paper doesn't capture the fear in a young employee's eyes. David had built his company on trust. He trusted his regional managers to uphold standards. He trusted the reporting systems to catch problems. He trusted that the values he cared about would flow down through every level of the organization. But trust without verification had allowed people like Greg to thrive while good employees like Riley suffered. That ended today. David put on the same disguise as yesterday. Worn jeans, gray hoodie, baseball cap, cheap glasses. He looked at himself in the mirror one more time. After today, he wouldn't need this disguise anymore. After today, everyone would know that the CEO of Tasty Bites was paying attention. He arrived at location 214 at 11 in the morning. The lunch rush was just starting. David walked in and immediately noticed Riley at the register. Her eyes widened slightly when she saw him, surprised that the kind stranger from yesterday had come back. He gave her a small nod and got in line. The restaurant looked even worse in daylight. There were water stains on the ceiling tiles that he hadn't noticed before. One of the booths had duct tape holding the seat cushion together. The men's room sign was hanging crooked. These weren't expensive problems to fix. This was just neglect. When David reached the counter, Riley greeted him with that same tired smile. Back again, she said quietly. Couldn't stay away, David replied. I'll just take a water today. Riley handed him a cup and David found a seat with a clear view of the entire restaurant. He wasn't here to eat. He was here to observe and to wait, because in about 10 minutes several other people would be walking through that door. Right on schedule, a woman in a business suit entered. She looked around the restaurant with a critical eye, making notes on a tablet. This was Helen Chang, Tasty Bites' Director of Health and Safety. 30 seconds behind her came 2 more people. One was Frank Morrison from Legal. The other was Diane Torres from Human Resources. Greg must have noticed the unusual visitors because he came out of his office looking both confused and nervous. He approached Helen with a forced smile, turning on the charm. Hello, can I help you folks? Greg asked. If you're from corporate, I wasn't told about any inspection today. Helen looked at him coolly. We don't always announce inspections. You must be Greg Patterson, the manager here. That's right, Greg said, his smile getting tighter. Listen, if this is about that complaint yesterday with the milk, that customer was being unreasonable. The product was fine. People are too sensitive these days. Frank stepped forward. Actually, we're here about several issues. We need to inspect your storage areas, check equipment maintenance logs, and review your staffing schedules. Greg's face went red. Now wait just a minute. You can't just walk in here and start demanding things. I run a tight ship here. My numbers are the best in the region. You can ask the CEO yourself. We're practically friends. That's when David stood up from his booth and walked over to the group. He pulled off his baseball cap and removed his glasses. Greg looked at him with confusion at first, then recognition, then pure terror. Mr. Rodriguez? Greg stammered. Why are you dressed like that? Because I wanted to see what really happens at my restaurants when nobody knows I'm watching, David said, his voice quiet but carrying weight. Every employee in the restaurant had stopped what they were doing. Riley stood frozen at the register, her mouth slightly open. Greg's face cycled through several emotions: shock, fear, anger, and then a desperate attempt at damage control. "Sir, this is highly unusual. If you wanted to visit, you should have told me. I would have prepared. I would have made sure everything was perfect for you." "That's exactly the problem," David said. "You would have made things look perfect for me while treating your employees and customers terribly every other day. I saw enough yesterday to know this location is violating nearly every standard we have." Greg tried to laugh it off. "Sir, I think there's been a misunderstanding. My numbers are excellent. I'm the most profitable location in the region. Whatever you think you saw—" "I saw you serve expired milk to a child," David interrupted. "I saw equipment that hasn't been cleaned in weeks. I saw 3 employees doing the work of 7. I saw you berate your staff for trying to do their jobs correctly. Those employees are lazy," Greg protested. "They need firm management or they slack off. You can't run a business by being soft on people." David took a step closer. "There's a difference between firm management and creating a hostile work environment. There's a difference between efficiency and cutting corners that put customers at risk." Helen held up her tablet. "Mr. Patterson, we've already documented 14 health code violations just from what we can see from here. The coffee machine alone could shut you down. And according to the inventory records I pulled this morning, you've been ordering 40% less fresh produce and dairy than the recommended minimums." Greg's face went from red to pale. I was trying to reduce waste, trying to be efficient with the budget." "You were trying to make your profit margins look good by serving substandard food," David said. "And you were covering it up with false reports." Diane stepped forward with a folder. "We've also received testimony from multiple employees about labor violations. Denied breaks, unpaid overtime, retaliation for complaints. Mr. Patterson, these are serious accusations." "Who said that?" Greg demanded, his eyes scanning the room, landing on Riley. "Was it her? She's been a troublemaker since day one. Always complaining, always trying to cause problems." Riley shrank back, fear flashing across her face. But David moved between them, blocking Greg's view of her. "Don't you dare," David said, his voice hard now. "That young woman showed more integrity in 5 minutes than you've shown in 8 months. She warned a customer about unsafe conditions even though she knew you might punish her for it. That's the kind of employee this company needs." Greg realized he was cornered. His charming facade cracked completely and what came out was ugly. "This is ridiculous. I made this location profitable. I followed corporate guidelines for cost management. If you fire me over this, I'll sue. I'll tell everyone that Tasty Bites punishes managers for doing their jobs. Corporate guidelines require fresh, safe food and proper treatment of employees," Frank said. "You violated both. The company has grounds for immediate termination with cause." Kevin, the young kid from the grill, spoke up suddenly. His voice cracked with emotion. "He made me work 6 hours without a break yesterday. When I said my legs hurt, he told me I was weak." Destiny, the single mom, added her voice. "He scheduled me to close at midnight and open at 6 the same day. When I said I couldn't find childcare for those hours, he threatened to fire me." One by one, the other employees started sharing their stories. The dam had broken. They weren't scared anymore because they saw that someone higher up was actually listening, actually cared. Greg looked around wildly. "This is mutiny. These people are ganging up on me. You can't believe everything they say." "I believe them because I saw it myself," David said. "I spent hours in this restaurant yesterday watching you. Everything they're saying matches what I witnessed." Helen closed her tablet. "Mr. Patterson, you're being terminated effective immediately. Security is outside to escort you from the premises. You'll need to surrender your keys, access cards, and any company property." "You can't do this," Greg said, but his voice had lost its strength. He looked at David with something between hatred and desperation. "I made this place profitable. That's what matters. That's all that matters in business." "No," David said firmly. "That's where you're wrong. Profit built on exploitation and dishonesty isn't real success. It's a house of cards waiting to collapse. I'd rather have a location that makes less money and treats people with dignity than one that looks good on paper while destroying lives." 2 security officers came through the door. Greg looked like he wanted to argue more, but the fight had gone out of him. As they escorted him toward the office to collect his things, he shot one last look at Riley, full of blame. David watched him go, then turned to face the employees. They were all staring at him with a mixture of shock, relief, and uncertainty about what would happen next. "I owe all of you an apology," David said. I built this company on values that I forgot to protect. I trusted the wrong people and didn't verify that the right things were happening. That changes now. Riley raised her hand tentatively like she was in school. What happens to us? Do we still have jobs? David smiled at her. You absolutely still have jobs. In fact, we're going to need your help to fix this place. The employees stood in a semicircle around David, still processing what had just happened. Greg was gone. The man who had made their lives miserable for 8 months had been escorted out by security. But relief mixed with uncertainty on their faces. They had seen managers come and go before. What if the next one was just as bad? What if things went back to normal once the CEO left? David understood their hesitation. Trust wasn't rebuilt with one dramatic firing. It was rebuilt through consistent action over time. But he could start today. First things first, David said, addressing the whole group. We're closing this location for the rest of the week. Panic flashed across several faces. Kevin spoke up nervously. Does that mean we're not getting paid? You're getting paid for the full week, David said firmly. Plus a bonus for what you've endured these past months. Consider it back pay for all those breaks you never got and all that overtime you worked for free. The tension in the room eased slightly. Destiny, the single mom, looked like she might cry from relief. During this closure, we're bringing in a deep cleaning crew, David continued. Every piece of equipment will be inspected, repaired, or replaced. The coffee machine, the ice cream machine, everything. We're also doing a complete inventory overhaul. Nothing expired, nothing questionable. Fresh start with fresh supplies, Helen added. We'll also be conducting a full health and safety audit. When this location reopens, it will meet every single standard. No exceptions. David looked at Riley. I'm going to need your help specifically. I want you to work with our training team this week. You're going to help us redesign the employee handbook and training program. Not the corporate version that sounds good in meetings, the real version that actually helps people do their jobs. Riley's eyes went wide. Me, but I'm just a cashier. I've only been here 6 months. Exactly, David said. You know what it's like on the ground. You know what new employees actually need to learn. The people at headquarters have been away from the counter too long. We need someone who understands the reality of this work. A small smile appeared on Riley's face. The first genuine smile David had seen from her. I can do that. David turned to Kevin next. How old are you? 17, sir, Kevin answered. And this is your first job? Kevin nodded. Yes, sir. I wanted to save money for college. How much were you making per hour? David asked. Minimum wage, $8.75. David shook his head. That's changing. Everyone here is getting a raise, effective immediately. Starting pay goes to $12. And Kevin, for someone who kept this kitchen running basically alone during rush hours, you're getting $13. Kevin looked stunned. Really? Really, David confirmed. And from now on, if you're scheduled for more than 5 hours, you get a break. Not a suggestion. A requirement. Anyone who tries to make you skip breaks will answer to me personally. He addressed the whole group again. Same goes for all of you. Breaks are mandatory. If a manager ever tells you to work through them, I want you to report it immediately. Here's my personal email address. David pulled out a business card and wrote his email on the back. He made copies on a nearby printer and handed them to each employee. I mean it. If something isn't right, you tell me directly. No more wondering if anyone cares. Someone does care. I do. Destiny raised her hand tentatively. What about scheduling? I really do need more consistent hours. My daughter's daycare needs to know my schedule a week in advance. That's completely reasonable, David said. Diane, add that to the new policy list. Schedules posted 2 weeks in advance minimum. And if someone has child care needs or school schedules, we work around them. Our employees have lives outside of work. We need to respect that. Diane was typing rapidly on her tablet, documenting everything. Got it. I'll draft the new policies by tomorrow. David pulled up a chair and sat down, gesturing for everyone else to sit too. The formality dropped away. This wasn't a CEO giving orders from on high anymore. This was a conversation. I want to tell you all something, David said. 20 years ago, I started this company with a food cart. Just me, a grill, and a dream. I worked 16-hour days. I burned my hands on hot oil. I dealt with mean customers and equipment that broke down. I know what it's like to be exhausted, to wonder if anyone appreciates your work, to feel invisible. He paused, looking at each of their faces. Somewhere along the way, I forgot that. I got comfortable in my office. I trusted reports instead of trusting my instincts. I let people like Greg happen because I wasn't paying attention. That's on me, and I'm sorry. Riley spoke quietly. You came here, though. You saw what was really happening. Most CEOs wouldn't do that. Most CEOs should, David replied. I learned something important yesterday. All the profit in the world doesn't mean anything if we're hurting the people who make it possible. You are the face of this company. You're the ones who talk to customers every day. You're the ones who make the food and keep things running. If you're miserable, the customers feel it. The food shows it. Everything suffers. He stood up and looked around the restaurant. From now on, things are going to be different. Not just here, but at every Tasty Bites location. I'm implementing an undercover program. I'll be visiting stores randomly, dressed like I was yesterday. Other evaluators will too. Not to spy on you or catch you doing something wrong. To catch the problems before they become disasters. To make sure managers are treating you right. Frank pulled out some paperwork. We're also setting up a confidential hotline. If you experience harassment, safety issues, or anything else concerning, you can call anonymously. Every report will be investigated. What about getting a new manager here? Kevin asked. Who's going to run this place? David looked at Riley. Actually, I was hoping Riley might be interested in an assistant manager position. With proper training and support, of course. Riley's mouth fell open. What, I'm 19. I don't have any management experience. You have integrity, David said. You have courage. You care about doing things right even when it's hard. Those are the qualities I want in leaders. The rest we can teach you. Tears started running down Riley's cheeks. I don't know what to say. Say yes, David smiled. Say you'll help us build something better. Yes, Riley whispered, then louder. Yes, absolutely yes. The other employees started clapping. Even in this run-down restaurant with its sticky floors and broken equipment, there was suddenly hope. Real hope that things could change. David spent the next 2 hours with them taking notes about what needed to be fixed. Not just equipment and supplies, but policies and procedures. They told him about scheduling software that didn't work properly, about uniforms that were uncomfortable and fell apart after a few washes, about training videos that were outdated and confusing. He wrote it all down. Before he left, David gathered everyone one more time. I want to make you a promise. In 6 months, I'm coming back here. Not undercover this time. I want to see how this location is doing with Riley helping to lead it. And I want you all to be honest with me about whether things really got better or if we just put a Band-Aid on the problem. We'll be honest, Destiny said. You've given us a reason to believe this might actually work. As David walked out to his truck, he felt different than he had in years. Lighter somehow. He had spent so long focused on expansion, on profit margins, on investor presentations. He had forgotten the simple truth that made him successful in the first place. Businesses aren't built on spreadsheets. They're built on people. 6 months later, David kept his promise. He returned to location 214. The transformation was remarkable. The restaurant gleamed. Every surface was clean. The equipment hummed efficiently. But more importantly, the employees looked different. They smiled real smiles. They moved with confidence instead of fear. And Riley, wearing her assistant manager badge proudly, had helped train 15 other employees across 5 locations. Customer satisfaction scores for location 214 had gone from the bottom 10% to the top 5% company-wide. But the number David was most proud of was different. Employee retention was 95%. People wanted to work there now. Riley showed him around, pointing out all the changes with obvious pride. We've become kind of famous, she said. Other locations want to know what we're doing differently. We had 3 employees from other stores ask to transfer here. That's because you're leading the right way, David said. You remembered what it was like to be in their shoes. As David prepared to leave, a family came in. A couple with a toddler in a pink jacket. The same family from 6 months ago who had been served expired milk. The father recognized David. You're the owner, right? The father said. We saw the news stories about the changes you made. That's me, David confirmed. The father extended his hand. We started coming back here about 2 months ago. Whatever you did, it worked. This place is completely different. Thank you for actually caring enough to fix it. David shook his hand, then knelt down to the little girl's level. And what do you think of the food here? The toddler grinned and held up a kid's meal toy. I like the chicken nuggets. And they gave me a princess. As David drove home that evening, he thought about the long journey from a food cart to a corporation and back to remembering what mattered.